The microwave clock glowed 11:45 p.m. in a sharp, neon green that seemed to vibrate against the sterile dark gray backsplash of the kitchen. It was a digital heartbeat in a room that had suddenly gone cold. I stood frozen, leaning my lower back against the waterfall edge of the marble kitchen island, a centerpiece of honed Carrara stone that I had personally financed with a check for $5,000. From this vantage point, I watched Tyler move through the open-concept living space. He wasn't packing for a business emergency or a family crisis. He was methodically stuffing my premium, four-season North Face sleeping bag into the heavy-duty duffel I'd bought him for our 3-year anniversary. Tyler was leaving for a glamping retreat in the Blue Ridge Mountains with Chloe. He called her his creative muse, a title that apparently granted her the right to use my hiking gear, my time, and the emotional space I had built for our future. "You're really going through with this?" I asked. My voice didn't crack, and it didn't carry the heat of an argument. It was flat, clinical, and precise, the tone of a senior project architect identifying a catastrophic failure in a load-bearing beam. "You're taking the equipment I paid for, to go on a trip you can't afford, with a woman who has spent the last 90 days attempting to sabotage our engagement." Tyler didn't even grant me the courtesy of eye contact. He was focused on the tension of a zipper, his movements fluid and casual, as if my presence were merely background noise in his grand artistic narrative. "Here we go again with the I paid for it spreadsheet," he sighed, the sound heavy with performed exhaustion. He finally stood upright, tossing his hair back with that practiced, effortless charm that used to feel like sunshine but now looked like a lack of structural integrity. "This is exactly why the spark is dying, Kayla. Your corporate rigid energy is a vacuum. You don't understand the lifestyle of a creator. To you, life is just a series of invoices and transactions." He slung the heavy bag over his shoulder, adjusted the strap, and looked at me with a smirk that felt like a slap. "If you don't like my lifestyle, Kayla, then leave. I'm not going to spend my life apologizing for having the courage to be inspired." I watched him walk toward the heavy oak door. I didn't scream, I didn't throw my keys, and I didn't block his exit to beg for a talk. Instead, my mind began to perform a spatial audit of the room. This was an 1,800-square-foot glass loft in the heart of the city, a premium piece of real estate that I secured with my $94,000 annual salary. Tyler was essentially a squatter in my grace, and the permit for that grace had just been revoked. The thud of the door closing wasn't the sound of a heart breaking. It was the sound of a demolition permit being stamped approved. He thought he was the architect of this exit, but he forgot that I was the one who held the original blueprints to his entire life. Before we dive into the systematic way Kayla reclaimed every inch of her world, I have to ask, have you ever been told to leave a home that you were the one actually paying for? Drop a yes or no in the comments. I'm curious how common this specific brand of audacity is in our community. I didn't retreat to the bedroom to weep into the pillows. I walked to my drafting table, the solid wood cool beneath my palms. I opened my laptop, and a surge of electric clarity washed over me. This wasn't a tragedy, it was a liquidation of bad assets. Tyler wanted a lifestyle without corporate energy? Fine. I was about to give him exactly what he could afford on a budget of $0. At exactly 11:55 p.m., I logged into our shared wedding portal. With 3 clinical clicks, I canceled the vineyard venue, the artisanal catering, and the florist. I watched the screen refresh. Event status, canceled. Deposit of $22,500 forfeited. I didn't flinch at the loss. In my professional world, a massive write-off on a failing project is always better than allowing the entire firm to collapse under the weight of a bad investment. That money was a sunk cost, a premium I was willing to pay to ensure my future against a total structural collapse. Tyler thought he had found freedom in the mountains. He had no idea that back in the city, I was already clearing the site for something much stronger. I didn't watch him from the window as he pulled away. I didn't need to see the taillights of the $65,000 SUV, an all-wheel drive machine I had co-signed for and whose monthly payments I covered disappear into the city's midnight mist. Instead, I sat at my drafting table, the same place where I'd spent countless late nights calculating the structural integrity of skyscrapers. I realized then that I had spent the last 3 years obsessing over the wrong project. I had been trying to renovate a man who was structurally unsound. As a senior project architect, I live by the laws of physics. If a beam is too weak, the floor will sag. If the foundation is sand, the walls will crack. But when it came to Tyler, I had intentionally ignored the data. I opened my private ledger, not the one for my firm, but the personal one I used to track my $94,000 annual income. I stared at the columns of numbers, and for the first time, I didn't see a life together. I saw a parasitic drain. The glass loft we lived in cost $2,200 per month. Every single rent check, every utility bill, every high-speed internet invoice, and every grocery delivery had been pulled from my bank account. Tyler's contribution to our shared life was exactly $0.00. He had managed to convince me that his brand consultancy was on the verge of a massive breakthrough and that my support was an investment in our future brand. But as I scrolled through the bank statements tonight, I saw the truth. There were charges at high-end cocktail bars where I hadn't been. There were receipts for boutique clothing stores that didn't sell anything in my size. He had been using my secondary credit card to fund the very lifestyle he claimed I didn't understand. I sat there, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes, and I realized I had been the stabilizer. In architecture, the stabilizer is the element that prevents a structure from collapsing under external pressure. I had provided the roof over his head, the fuel in his car, and the very clothes on his back, only for him to tell me that my presence was suffocating him. This was a classic case of the sunk cost awakening. I had poured hundreds of thousands of dollars and 3 years of my prime into this man. Most people would look at that loss and think, I have to stay to make it worth it. But I looked at it like a condemned building. Just because I'd spent a fortune on the initial construction didn't mean I should stay inside while the roof caved in. The most professional thing you can do with a total loss is to demolish it and clear the site. At 12:15 a.m., the stabilizer officially resigned. I didn't feel a flicker of sadness. I felt the mechanical satisfaction of a demolition crew placing the final charges. I sent a high-priority email to Ron, our landlord. I didn't ask for a favor. I didn't explain the heartbreak. I simply stated the facts. I was terminating the lease effective immediately. I attached the confirmation for the $4,400 early termination penalty, which I paid out of my emergency savings. Strike my name from the lease by 8:00 a.m. Monday, I wrote, the keys will be returned, and the unit will be vacated. I then looked at the $6,500 custom engagement ring sitting on the nightstand, the one I had put the down payment on because Tyler's capital was tied up. I didn't throw it. I didn't flush it. I placed it back in its box. I would be returning it to the jeweler for the refund of the deposit the very next morning. I rubbed my eyes, expecting to feel the sting of tears, but there was only the cold, dry clarity of an audit. My compassion for Tyler had been an overdrafted account, and tonight I was closing the branch forever. This wasn't revenge. This was a structural adjustment. By Friday evening, the silence in the loft was no longer heavy, it was expectant. The only sound was the relentless, mocking ping of my phone as it vibrated against the marble countertop. Tyler was officially off the grid at the Blue Ridge Retreat, a phrase that apparently meant posting hourly updates to his Instagram story for his 4,000 followers. I sat on the hardwood floor of our walk-in closet, surrounded by empty hangers and the scent of expensive cedar, and watched the first clip. It was a high-angle, cinematic shot of a roaring campfire, the sparks drifting up like dying stars into the mountain air. In the foreground, a pair of legs stretched out toward the flames. They were Chloe's legs, and she was wearing my favorite hand-knit wool socks, the ones my grandmother had made for me before she passed. Setting the creative intention for the weekend, the caption read, decorated with a sparkle emoji. So grateful for the rare souls who truly understand the vision and don't try to cage it with expectations. Then came the direct messages. Tyler had a specific, rhythmic architecture to his manipulation. He never opened with an apology for his exit. He opened with a critique of my character to justify his presence in another woman's orbit. You're being so rigid again, Kayla, the first text read. I could feel your corporate energy suffocating the loft before I even left. It's a vacuum that kills art. Chloe actually inspires me. She sees the brand, not just the bank account. You provide the logistics, but she provides the soul. Try to find some of your own while I'm away. I recognize the pattern with the cold precision of a structural engineer identifying a design flaw. This was the just a friend gaslighting trap. By constantly elevating Chloe as his spiritual muse while relegating me to the role of logistics manager, he was attempting to keep me in a state of perpetual emotional hunger. It's a classic triangulation tactic. He creates a competition between the supportive partner and the inspiring outsider. The goal was to make me the one providing the $2,200 in rent, work harder, pay more, and stay silent about his disrespect, just to prove I could be soulful enough to keep him. He wanted me to believe that my $94,000 salary was a moral failing, a dry and lifeless obstacle to his genius, while his $0 contribution was a sign of artistic purity. But as I sat there, the trap didn't snap shut. For the first time in 5 years, I looked at the luxury finishes of this closet, the custom shelving I had designed and paid for, and I realized that Tyler didn't actually need a muse. He needed a patron who wouldn't ask for a return on investment. Chloe wasn't an inspiration. She was a co-conspirator in a fantasy life that I was currently dismantling. I didn't reply to his texts. I didn't send a long, emotional paragraph defending my soul or reminding him who paid for the hiking boots Chloe was currently scuffing up. I simply screenshotted the messages and the Instagram stories, including the one where she was drinking from my custom travel mug. I saved them into a cloud folder labeled Contractual Breach. The anger inside me wasn't a roar anymore. It was the steady blue flame of a blowtorch, focused entirely on the structural points of Tyler's ego. He thought he was finding himself in the mountains. He had no idea that back in the city, the person who kept his entire world spinning had just hit the emergency stop button. I felt a strange, professional satisfaction. Tyler had told me to leave if I didn't like his lifestyle. I was about to show him that his lifestyle was just a collection of my assets, and I was calling in the debt. By Friday morning, the glass loft no longer felt like a sanctuary of modern design. It felt like a job site scheduled for an immediate, total demolition. I had taken a personal day from the firm, but I didn't spend it in a state of emotional paralysis. I spent it with a clipboard, a heavy-duty roll of industrial packing tape, and a 3-man moving crew I'd hired with an exorbitant weekend surcharge. Tessa arrived at 8:00 a.m. sharp, carrying 2 extra-large black coffees and a look of grim, focused determination. She didn't ask if I was okay or if I wanted to talk about my feelings. She knew that for a senior project architect, okay is defined by a project that stays on schedule and under budget. She just looked at the Italian leather sectional that defined our living room, the one Tyler used for his creative meditation. "That's the $1,600 piece from the showroom, right?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "Every stitch of it," I replied, handing her a highlighter and the inventory list. "My name is on the original invoice." The delivery address was my office. "It goes in truck 1. The extraction was a masterpiece of logistics, a reverse engineering of the life I had so carefully constructed. We didn't just move boxes, we systematically dismantled the entire ecosystem Tyler had built around my bank account. I watched with clinical detachment as the movers crated the 75-inch television I'd bought so he could study cinematography. The high-end espresso machine, the one he used to make lattes for his midday creative brainstorming sessions, was packed away before the internal boiler had even fully cooled. I didn't feel a flicker of sadness. I felt like a bank reclaiming collateral from a defaulted loan. I moved through the space with the energy of a site foreman. Every time a piece of furniture left the room, the acoustic profile of the loft changed. The echo got sharper, colder, and more honest. The space was returning to its original state, a shell. It was a hollow shell of white paint and industrial glass. But I wasn't finished with the physical assets. I sat on the floor, the only place left to sit, and opened my laptop to access the invisible infrastructure that made Tyler's lifestyle possible. I logged into the utility portal. My name was the only one on the account. Tyler had once claimed that setting up utilities was too bureaucratic for his artistic temperament. I didn't transfer the service. I terminated it, Effective Sunday night at midnight, the lights would go out. The high-speed fiber internet, the lifeblood of his brand, would cease to exist. What about the smart locks and the home automation system? Tessa asked, labeling a box of my professional reference books. The bridge and the hub are in my briefcase, I said, tapping the leather bag. When the Wi-Fi dies tonight, the digital key he has on his phone becomes a useless brick. He'll have to use the manual override key under the mat. I paused, a small, sharp smile touching my lips. And I'm turning those into Ron, at 8 o'clock a.m. Monday morning. As the last truck pulled away, I stood in the center of the echoing living room. My footsteps sounded resonant, powerful, and for the first time in 5 years, completely unburdened. Tyler had told me to leave if I didn't like his lifestyle. I realized as I looked at the empty space that his lifestyle was actually just a collection of my things, arranged to make him feel important. Without me, he didn't have a lifestyle. He just had an empty room and a cold floor. I was no longer the silent investor in his failure. I was the owner of the vacancy. By Monday morning, the glass loft was nothing more than 4 white walls and a resonant, mocking echo. I met Ron, the landlord, in the lobby at exactly 8 o'clock a.m. I had the keys in a small manila envelope, but I wasn't just handing them over. I needed the final walkthrough report to be spotless. My reputation as a senior project architect is built on attention to detail and structural integrity, and I wasn't about to let a failed relationship leave a smudge on my professional history or my credit score. Ron was a man of few words, usually content as long as the direct deposit hit on the first of every month. But today, he looked at me with a strange, hesitant frown, his digital tablet clutched tightly in his hand. He wasn't looking at the keys. He was looking at a file on his screen. "Kayla," he said, clearing his throat. "I got the early termination wire. Everything is square there. You're legally off the hook for the remaining months of the lease. But we need to discuss the structural modification request that was filed last week." My office was under the impression this was a joint venture. I froze, the cool air of the lobby suddenly feeling like ice. "The what?" "Ron, I haven't filed any modification requests for this unit. The internal load-bearing alteration for the brand studio build-out," Ron explained, scrolling through a multi-page PDF document. "The request Tyler submitted 18 days ago. He told my office that you were the lead architect on the project and that you'd personally guaranteed the $10,000 liability for the renovation. He even provided a signed letter of intent on what looked like your firm's letterhead." I felt the blood drain from my face, replaced by a cold, tingling fury that started in my fingertips and moved to my chest. I took the tablet from his hands. There it was. A formal request to knock out a partition wall and install industrial-grade track lighting. A massive project that would have compromised the unit's insurance and potentially its structural stability. At the bottom of the document was my signature. Or rather, a pathetic, shaky imitation of my signature that only someone who didn't know my work would believe. I didn't scream. I didn't gasp. I felt my pulse slow down to a steady, lethal rhythm. The kind of calm you need when you're calculating the load capacity of a bridge. I analyzed the document with the eyes of a forensic auditor. He hadn't just faked my name. He had attempted to hijack my professional license to validate his creative vision. "Ron," I said, my voice as flat and unyielding as a spirit level, "I didn't sign this. I've never seen this document in my life. I haven't been lead architect on anything in this building except for my own career." Ron's eyes widened behind his glasses. "He told me it was a surprise for your 5-year anniversary. He said you were investing in the family brand and that he was handling the paperwork so you wouldn't have to stress about the bureaucracy. It's a surprise." "All right," I replied, pulling my phone out and opening my high-resolution scanning app. I took a photo of the forged document and the digital timestamp of its submission. "It's a surprise for the local precinct and my firm's legal counsel. This isn't just a lie, Ron. This is a felony. In my world, we don't call this inspiration. We call it identity theft and document forgery." This was the kill shot. Up until this moment, Tyler had just been a parasite, a lazy, entitled dreamer who forgot to pay rent. I thought he was just a man who got lost in a camping trip with a muse. But this was predatory. He had attempted to forge my professional credentials to fund a vanity project for his brand, all while planning to tell me to leave the moment he didn't like my corporate energy. He had tried to anchor a $10,000 debt to my name while he prepared to sail off into the sunset with Chloe. I realized then that Tyler hadn't just been living off me. He'd been mining me for resources like a spent quarry. He'd been looking for every crack in my boundaries where he could wedge a crowbar to pry out more value. But he'd made a fatal mistake. He forgot that an architect knows exactly where the load-bearing points are, and I was about to pull the pin on the whole structure. "I'm filing a police report for forgery and identity theft immediately, Ron," I said, handing him back the tablet with a steady hand. "And I'd suggest you do the same for the unauthorized modification attempt. My name is off this lease. My credit is frozen. And Tyler? Tyler is about to find out that the corporate energy he hates so much comes with a very effective, very expensive legal department. He wanted a lifestyle of freedom? I'm about to give him the freedom of a jail cell. The Blue Ridge retreat ended at sunset on Sunday. But for Tyler, the real darkness started the moment he stepped off the elevator on the 12th floor. I wasn't there to see it, but as an architect, I could reconstruct the scene with structural precision. He would have been humming, perhaps still tasting the artisanal gin Chloe had bought with my credit card, expecting to walk into a temperature-controlled sanctuary of high-end leather and ambient lighting. Instead, he walked into a tomb. The first thing that would have hit him was the thermal shift. The air conditioning had been off for over 48 hours, and the loft was a stifling 85 degrees. He would have reached for the light switch, a muscle memory gesture, and felt nothing but the plastic click of a dead circuit. No recessed lighting. No glowing smart home hub. No high-speed Wi-Fi signal waiting to connect to his phone and validate his existence. When he finally managed to fumble for his phone's flashlight, the beam would have cut through the darkness to reveal the true scale of the vacuum. The Italian sofa? Gone. The 75-inch screen? Gone. Even the rugs had been rolled up, leaving nothing but the cold, industrial concrete floor. Every piece of comfort, every scrap of aesthetic he used to build his fake persona had been reclaimed by the person who actually earned it. He was standing in 1,800 square feet of nothingness. My phone buzzed at exactly 12:14 a.m. I was sitting in my new apartment, a modest but solid one-bedroom with a balcony overlooking the park, drinking tea in a space that was entirely mine. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Kayla? Kayla, what the hell is happening?" Tyler's voice was high-pitched, vibrating with a frantic, entitled panic. "The loft. Everything is gone. I can't get the Wi-Fi to work. I'm standing here in the dark. Were we robbed? Did you call the police?" "No one was robbed, Tyler," I said. My voice was a level 0, a flat line on a monitor. "I simply performed a structural adjustment. You told me last Tuesday that if I didn't like your lifestyle, I should leave. I spent the last 5 days realizing you were right. I don't like it. So I took mine with me. You took the bed. You took the espresso machine. I have a meeting tomorrow morning." He was pacing now. I could hear his footsteps echoing off the bare walls of the loft. The sound was hollow, exactly like the man making it. "You can't just shut off the power, Kayla. That's illegal. I live here." "Actually," I replied, "you occupied a space that I leased. As of 8 o'clock this morning, my name is off that contract, and the early termination fee is paid in full. The power was in my name. The internet was in my name. The furniture was in my name. You wanted a lifestyle of creative freedom, Tyler. Well, here it is. You are now free from the burden of my corporate energy and everything it paid for. I have nowhere to go," he whispered, the bravado finally cracking. "I suggest you call Chloe," I said. "Maybe she can inspire a floor for you to sleep on. Don't call me again. My lawyer will be in touch regarding the $10,000 forgery you left on the landlord's desk. Enjoy the silence. Tyler, it's the only thing in that room that actually belongs to you." I hung up. I didn't block him, not yet. I wanted him to see the delivered status on his frantic texts and know that the silence wasn't a glitch. It was the final design. I didn't have to wait long for the counterattack. In the world of people like Tyler, accountability feels like persecution, and they always retreat to the same fortress: family. 2 days after the extraction, a heavy, rhythmic pounding started on my new front door. I checked the camera. It was Sandra, Tyler's mother, her face twisted in a mask of suburban outrage. Behind her stood Kenneth, Tyler's father, looking exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the time of day. I opened the door just enough to look out. "Kayla! How dare you!" Sandra shrieked before the hinge had even stopped moving. "Tyler is a wreck. He's sleeping on a literal floor. You stole his furniture. You cut off his utilities. You've committed financial abuse against your own fiancé. He's a genius, and you've treated him like a tenant." I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed. "I didn't steal anything, Sandra. I reclaimed my property. And as for his mental health, perhaps he can find some soulful inspiration in the reality of his own bank account. I'm done being his ATM. You're cold," she spat, her voice trembling with the kind of enabling fury that had raised a monster. "You're part of this family. You have an obligation to support him through his creative journey. That's what love is." I felt a surge of clarity, a moment of deep, internal alignment. This was the moment I realized the truth behind Module 4, letting go of bloodlines. I wasn't just breaking up with a man. I was resigning from a cult of mediocrity. For years, I had been the successful one, believing I was obligated to carry the weight of everyone else's failures. I thought loyalty meant being a human safety net. But true loyalty isn't a suicide pact. Breaking the cycle means realizing that blood isn't a contract that allows people to bleed you dry. It's an act of profound self-respect to look at a toxic family tree and decide that the rot stops with you. I wasn't being cold. I was being healthy. "He's not a genius, Sandra," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "He's a 30-year-old man who forged my signature on a $10,000 loan. That's not a creative journey. That's a crime." Sandra went silent, her mouth hanging open. She looked back at Kenneth, expecting reinforcement. But Kenneth did something I didn't expect. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Sandra's shoulder and gently but firmly pulling her back. "That's enough, Sandra," Kenneth said. His voice was gravelly and filled with a strange kind of relief. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw an ally. "Kayla, I'm sorry. I've watched her do this for 30 years. Every time he failed, she bought him a new ladder. I tried to tell her she was building him a house of cards, but she wouldn't listen." He reached into his pocket and handed me a small, embossed business card. "This is my direct line. If Tyler's lawyer gives you any trouble regarding that forged signature, you call me. I'll testify. I'm done paying for his lifestyles, too." He looked at his wife, then back at me. "You did the right thing, kid. You got out before the roof caved in. Don't you ever look back." As they walked away, Sandra's protests fading into the hallway, I felt the last cord snap. The cycle was broken. I shut the door, locked it, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. For the first time in 5 years, the air I breathed was entirely my own.